Watch The Atheist Experience live Sundays at 4:30 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/ytaxp and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callaxp.
It's time to get sexy on Secular Sexuality.
That is such a hot intro song. No matter what intro I come prepared with, it gets thrown out the window just because of how awesome the lead-in is. Hello and welcome to Secular Sexuality. I'm Puck, substituting for our regular hosts. And for the podcast audience, the bundle of energy that seems so excited to be here, she can't sit still, is Erika, also known as Gutsick Gibbon. Erika, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, that's me. I do agree. The intro completely slaps. I was like getting into it. I was seeing you get into it. And then I kind of forgot where I was for a minute. I was like astrally projecting from my body. I'm Erika. I go by Gutsick Gibbon here on YouTube. I'm a primatologist, so that means I study monkeys and apes and lemurs and lorises and all sorts of different critters, but all within the order Primates. So my education is I got a BSA in pre-professional animal science because I was like, I want to be a vet. And I got a vet job and I was like, I don't want to be a vet. I picked up a minor in biology and another one in anthropology at that time. And then I was like, I'm really into primates. So I went and got my master's of research in that. And I think we're going to be talking a little bit about primates today, non-human ones and human ones alike.
We are, absolutely. Now, I don't want you to sell yourself short on this. And what we have here tonight is someone who has gone toe to toe with Ken Ham and Kent Hovind. We have these debates on file. We know you've done this, and you've done a fantastic amount of work being a science educator, fighting back against young Earth creation.
Yeah, young Earth creationism is the thorn in my proverbial side here. I grew up a young Earth creationist until I reached high school, and I was like, uh-oh. Uh-oh, wait a second. Everything I was ever taught is wrong, and some of it is laced inherently with dishonesty. So when I eventually, I did my start on Reddit, so you'll find me as Gutsick Gibbon on Reddit as well, fighting with creationists over there. And it kind of started because I had this young Earth creationist coworker when I was working in that vet job I previously mentioned as a veterinary assistant. And I was like, you know what? I feel like I could talk for long periods of time in front of a camera about this. So why not? I'll just go ahead and do it.
We have a lot of material to get into today, so we might as well just dive right into it. But if anybody in the audience had a question for Erika or me, the number is right there in the down there part. Give us a call, give us your questions, and we'll see what we can do with it. This is going to be a fun, high energy episode. It's all we can do to contain from just bouncing off the walls. But let's try to get a topic going here. Okay. We're going to be talking about, like we said, primate behavior in anthropology and the nature of sexual activity, what we can learn by studying our closest relatives, and then what we can do with that knowledge and apply it in our lives. So let's start with this. How ancient is non-heteronormative sexuality?
That's such a good place to hit it off, because there's so many different directions you could go with that. I think first and foremost, it's important to appreciate that, like, if there's an animal out there that has sex, you're probably also going to see homosexual sex there as well. This goes for things that are incredibly, what we would consider primitive. So arthropods and different kinds of fish and things of that nature. And it's most prevalent in the mammals. So yes, non-heteronormative sexuality is super, super ancient because we see it in the basal organisms that we have today. And it's only continued to get more and more complex in both the reason for its existence and kind of the minutia of it. Why is it that we see homosexual interactions in mammals, and how does it differ from the kinds of interactions that we see in something like bed bugs, which, as as horrifying as bed bugs are in and of themselves, they get frisky all across the board. So I respect the hustle with the bed bugs, but
that's not the visual that I was expecting to start the show with. Okay, no, but the reason we talk about this, and I get this question a lot, it's like, why do people in the atheist YouTube community always talk about sexual issues? And the reason we push back on it is because they won't leave us alone, right?
Oh.
And how many times have we heard an apologist say that anything other than reproductive monogamous sex is not natural, right? And that's the word that they use for it, not natural.
Every
So
time.
let's start with that. Let's start. What do you have to say with the idea that non-reproductive sex is not natural?
I mean, yeah, that's completely absurd, and it's turned on its head just by simply glancing for 10 seconds at any area of the animal kingdom. We see it everywhere, and it's the big elephant in the room is that very few organisms pair bond for life. I mean, monogamous sex is like the extreme outlier in the animal kingdom. Homosexual sex is again very common. Whether it's in very basal organisms because there's confusion going on, or it's a natural and important part of social bonding and cohesion that we see in many social mammals, both of these things pervade the animal kingdom. Which is why it's really funny to me that we hear, religious individuals come out and say stuff like, these are the same guys who will be like, evolution's not real. The Earth was created 6,000 years ago and we were created as is. And then they turn around and they're like, heh, well, if it's not natural, then it must not be good. And it's like, okay, pick a lane. You can't have your cake and eat it too,
Well, and for my brief amount of time, you've been studying this for longer than I have, but in my brief amount of time trying to understand the young Earth creationist mind and the way that they present their apologetics, it seems almost like a comical oversimplification of everything.
Oh,
Where if
man.
you just take a little tiny look, a little bit closer at what they seem to present as being obvious, the way it comes across to me is like the flat earthers will say it's obvious that the earth is flat. Well, no, but if you do a little bit of investigation, you will find out that our initial perceptions are incorrect.
Well,
And
yeah.
so you do see this behavior around in the animal kingdom.
Yeah, 100%, Puck. You nailed that. I mean, biology is inherently unintuitive. Biology is a very, very messy field of science, particularly and primarily because it's dictated by natural selection and random mutation. So it's like it's naturally going to be a little bit convoluted. But yeah, I mean, if this were a stream about young Earth creationism and like what goes into that, we'd be here for like several millennia, honestly. There's just so maybe 6,000 millennia or 6 millennia.
Ooh.
Ooh, uh-oh.
Oh, you see that's why I like exactly what buttons to push. I'm sure they heard you from over in like creationism web over there, hearing you
Oh,
say
yeah.
6,000 years. They're on their way over here to call in
Oh,
and hassle you right now.
hey, my haters only make me more powerful.
Okay, so you touched on this. Let's go to this really quick. Just when we speak to not any young Earth creationists who might be here in this episode, how could non-procreative sexual activity be consistent with what they call evolutionism?
Yeah, I mean, that's a perfect way of kind of phrasing it, right? For a long time, homosexuality was considered to be this Darwinian paradox because non-procreative sex doesn't lead to offspring. So inherently, it's a fitness drain. Like that is a concept that would be very well understood, very very promoted in evolutionary biology until somewhat recently, when when people who were out in the field came back and they were like, "Listen, there's a lot of gay stuff going on out there." And everyone was kind of like, okay, well, why? What's the benefit here for the individual? If the goal of evolution is to pass your genes on, what role is it that homosexual sex could play? And the answer is that it's inherently related to sociality. This is why it's considered, they call it like the sociosexual hypothesis. So organisms that exhibit primarily or at least frequent homosexual behavior, they tend to be mammals first and foremost. Like we see a ton of social mammals exhibiting homosexual behavior. And I think it's fair to say that almost always it's for the purposes of social bonding or lowering tensions. This is especially the case in primates. But for instance, even some of the more masculine animals that we consider like these, he-man, woman haters, like the lions, the big maned masculine lions, 8% of the mountings that males perform are going to be homosexual. That's like 1 in 10 about. We see similar numbers in things like American bison, giraffes. Sometimes rams have exclusive pair bonded male partners. And the reason is because the overarching reason is like, okay, well, for the group, this is going to increase stability. The happier everyone is, the less fighting there's going to occur, and the more that everyone can pay attention to either feeding the group or looking out for things that are trying to feed on the group. So inherently, there is this beneficial social aspect to homosexuality, whether it boils down to just keeping everybody happy, or in the more complex animals like your hominids. So that would be us, gorillas, chimps, bonobos, orangs, things like that. They can even lend a hand in raising the offspring. And we'll get to this later, but that actually boosts their fitness as well. When you get an extra pair of hands in there to help keep an eye on the youngsters, whether or not they're right down your lineage or lineage adjacent, that's a huge fitness boost for the group and for the individual.
You know, there are a number of people who watch this show, and when they're watching, they're not really watching. They have it on in the background, or they'll be listening in podcast form and not able to see this. For those of you who are doing that, I strongly encourage you to find this episode on YouTube and turn on the background. In the background of Erika's screen here, never mind that Erika is just fun to watch as she speaks, but there is a large number of skulls back there. We're talking about someone who really knows what she's talking about. There you go. Let's get that nice
Be
one up in the
careful
image.
with asking about the skulls, Puck. I'll turn around and start handling them and telling you all about them, because that is my greatest desire. I just want to sit in front of the camera and tell you about the skulls.
No, that's good that we have people who are so passionate about this. I just want to encourage people, if you typically do not watch the show, this is the show to actually come in here and watch. We're having a lot of fun here. One thing though, I got to go back on this, because it is a fallacy to assume that just because something is natural,
Yeah.
it means that it's good, right? We know that just because it's natural, that's not a good enough reason. So what can we learn though about human behavior when we see these behaviors in other species?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You're totally correct. Murder is natural. Chimps go around killing each other all the time, and bonobos less so. But just because it's natural doesn't mean it's good. This is strictly in response to this idea that it is definitively unnatural, and that's demonstrably false. I mean, seriously, you can pay, again, 10 seconds of attention to anything in nature, and you'll see that homosexuality is everywhere. This does tell us a ton about ourselves, because humans, we're primates, we're catarrhines, we're apes, we are members of the animal kingdom. And looking at our closest living relatives, or even just members of our order, other primates, or members of our class, we can find out a lot about what it is that's beneficial about certain human behaviors for the group. And we can also figure out, well, why did they evolve in the first place? And I think that's really important to moving forward. So you can't necessarily understand how to move towards the future if you don't understand a little bit about your past.
No, that's fantastic. And that's why, like, when I first we were coming up with topics, you and I sat down and we basically did a whole show, just you and me just talking. And and I just realized that the problem is not going to be coming up with enough to talk about. The problem was going to be how much is going to be left on the table here.
Right.
So we are going to do our very best to have you've given me a large number of sources over here, and we'll put it down in the description or in the comments, so that anybody can start researching this stuff. But I guess that's another question that a lot of us don't have your background in science and primatology. So when these questions do come up, these difficult questions that some of us get posed at the Thanksgiving room table about, well, evolution can't explain this. Where do we start? Where do us lay people start to get the ammunition to fight back with these conversations?
Yeah, I mean, funny enough, that's kind of why I picked YouTube, is because YouTube is such a great resource for people to kind of get a basic lay understanding of a lot of these concepts. I mean, in a nutshell, has some amazing, Kurzgesagt has some amazing videos with regard to, like, okay, what is evolution? What is human evolution? What do we have to support these ideas? And what do we have to support the idea that humans aren't apart from nature, but we are beautifully a part of it? So you can really just get the basics from that. I'm hoping, fingers crossed, to shill for myself here. As I do like my first TA session here in the fall, I'm hoping to do a series on my own channel that's like, hey, here's a really basic understanding of like undergraduate biological anthropology or human evolution. But really and truly, YouTube's got some incredible sources for getting a basic understanding of it. And I promise you, your aunt and uncle at the Thanksgiving table will not have the basics understood. I mean, these are the same folks who are like, oh, why are there still monkeys if we came from monkeys? Okay.
And that just shows a lack of understanding of the actual processes that are involved, right?
Right. Yeah, of course.
But see, that's one of the shocking things about groups like AIG and groups like Christian, because they have such a huge body of work that just by the size of it, adds a little bit of legitimacy. Not
Well,
only that, but there's so much of it that it becomes difficult to start to know, where do we fight back against this?
Well, and isn't it curious that they've got their own research journal of which the contents are never submitted to conventional peer-reviewed resources, right? I mean, if these guys are really coming out with all this support genetically of, oh, mitochondrial Eve lived only 6,000 years ago, well, why isn't Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson punting that to Nature, or PLOS? And the answer is because, and this is increasingly evident, I think a layperson to an expert alike can see this. Take a piece of work that someone has published to Nature or PLOS or Science, any of those, and compare it to what you see in the Answers Research Journal. These two things are like looking at an essay you wrote in third grade compared to something you submitted to like Lit 101 in undergrad. They are leagues apart. So, I mean, yes, it can be intimidating, but it's a smokescreen.
No, and I'll agree to that, but it's just so robust that you counter something, and by the time you counter something, the person that you're talking to pulls up about 5 or 6 other links and sends that and adds that to the Facebook conversation.
Right. Yeah,
I'm sure
what
there's
is
some people who are nodding along. It's like, yeah, I've had those
what is it?
conversations.
It's Brandolini's law, right? It's like if you can say so much BS in one sentence that like the time that it takes to debunk every single minute point of that is going to take you far longer than it'll take them to come up with 20 other bogus sources.
And the thing is, like, there are answers, there are refutations to all this crazy stuff that they say, but they're not always the simple explanation. Like sometimes they'll think of something, it's like they just blurt it off in an article, and to counter that takes a good amount of time and a good amount of knowledge. So as lay people, as people who don't have your knowledge and expertise as to where to go, give us some ammunition here. Like, where can we go to start fighting back against what we hear? Are there any good resources for this?
Oh,
Aside from you, because you're a great resource already.
for
But aside
young
from
Earth,
you, what else do we have?
yeah, for young Earth creationism
Yeah.
specifically. Oh yeah, the debate evolution subreddit is excellent. Obviously, Talk Origins is the classic. Talk Origins is, and I was saying this to Puck earlier. Actually, it's funny because they haven't updated their site in like a decade, but all their refutations still work because the creationists are saying the same stuff. So your Talk Origins is going to be great. Natural Historia is a blog online. Age of Rocks is another one specifically for geology that's going to be excellent. And some of these individuals are religious as well, which I find particularly interesting because they understand that your faith and science, like there are aspects of them that can go hand in hand. You don't have to reject conventional science to have a faith. It's just you can't be a young Earth creationist and be adherent to conventional science, to what we observe. As for YouTube channels, I have a ton of friends online, conventional scientists, colleagues who are informally and formally trained. Creation Myths is excellent if you want to talk about like the genetic stuff. Dapper Dino does a lot with relation to their dinosaur claims. Their Science Side Up is excellent if you want to look at climatology and how they butcher all of climatology, because of course they're climate change deniers. Why wouldn't they be?
No, Professor Dave Explains is one of my go-tos also.
Professor Dave is excellent. Yeah, he does an excellent job. Aaron Ra has an excellent series as well. I'm sure everyone here knows Aaron's work as well. And I'm trying to think.
Okay, so while you're thinking about that, I'm going to ask you the same question because I love science educators, and I love the people who are putting themselves out there as science educators. But one of the questions that I like to ask every single one that I get is, there's a certain point where what you're talking about far exceeds any of my knowledge, right? And I just have to, and you're going to hear this is an apologetic talking point too. You're just taking it on faith that what they're saying is real and accurate. So, Erika, how can we trust what you and other science educators say and not just have that be blind faith on our part?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, there's an excellent text, two actually excellent texts out there that I want to recommend to folks who really want to dig their teeth into this question. One is called The Death of Expertise, and the other one is called The War on Science. And it's essentially what you're asking. Why is it that we trust the scientists? Well, for the same reason that you call a plumber when you've got issues with your sink, or you go to a specific kind of doctor if you've got an issue with your eye, you go to an optometrist versus someone going to a neurologist if it's an issue with your brain. And that's because no one can be an expert at everything. Our society is built around understanding that some people are going to be and devote more time towards certain kinds of expertise, whereas others are going to go other directions with their expertise. we rely on that trust in a way that's evident in our daily lives. You trust that your car manufacturer built a car that's going to get up and run. You trust your doctor that the treatments that you get are indeed going to work. And the fact that we're still here is excellent support for the idea that, like, yeah, trusting the experts tends to work. And the funny thing is that the folks who are saying, "Oh, well, you're doing it on blind faith," well, that's what they do too. I mean, they trust their car manufacturer when they drive around. They trust their doctor when they get an X-ray. You know, they make these same sort of concessions that just involve, or that are just necessary for living in the modern world. This division of labor is what defines why humans are so successful. We know how to partition out work to people who are good at what they're good at. I mean, hunter gatherer is like what we call your kind of first anatomically modern Homo sapiens societies. The hunters hunted, and by the way, that wasn't, those gender roles were not as strict as we were previously taught to believe. That information is coming forward as well. And your gatherers gathered, but the folks who were good at their jobs took those jobs and performed them, and lo and behold, 300,000 years later, here we are. Trusting experts is, it's not blind faith, it's the educational system in action.
See, this is why I like working with the shows that I work with. This one and on Truth Wanted plug, and on nonprofits plug, because these are, you know, where we take the thinking from religious people, and we really put it where the rubber meets the road, right? And we say this is
Right.
not just the religious thinking. This is how it affects us in our daily lives. And right now we're still in the middle of a pandemic where a lot of people aren't trusting the scientific advice, and looking at the
Please
CDC,
get
who, you know what,
vaccinated.
they've probably
Please
done a
get
lot
vaccinated.
more research into it than someone who's just scrolling through Facebook. There's a good reason to trust, not just on blind faith, but the fact that they have more access to the materials, they have more people dedicated to it. Yeah, they're probably going to be able to do more research than you.
We're
It's probably a good idea to defer to their
Yeah,
decisions.
we're talking hundreds of thousands of hours of collective study amongst people who are doing nothing but what science does best, which is find out the truth about the world around us by making predictions and testing them. That's inherently different from blind faith, which is, it's taken on the hope or the belief that something will happen, not the active evidence that it is destined to, effectively, by what we understand about the natural world. Yes, please get vaccinated. Everyone get vaccinated.
All right. Well, this is a call-in show, so by all means, please call in with your questions. Number is right down there. We do have a caller, Erica. Would you like to hit the lines and see what we got?
Yeah, let's do it.
Fantastic. We have Teren, he, him from California. How you doing today?
Hi, great. I love the show. What's up?
Hi. What did you want to ask us about?
I just wanted to ask, what can primatology, or the study of like primates in general, teach us about like transgender people?
Oh, that's an awesome question, Teren. Seriously. It's really interesting because Puck and I kind of talked about this when we were setting up the show. The idea of gender roles in other primates, it's a really interesting question to ask because they are indeed incredibly fluid. There are classic kind of male and female roles within a troop that individual primates can take, and I'm mostly speaking about circumpithecoids, so your social ground monkeys, baboons, macaques, catarrhines, including us and the rest of the apes. But as an interesting kind of anecdotal story that I want to tell about this kind of a primate changing from one specific, easily identifiable, as far as putting it on into, you know, numbers on a sheet, to a completely different role. One of my colleagues worked with vervet monkeys. They're adorable little ground monkey that lives in South Africa, and she was watching this troop of individual monkeys. And there was this alpha male of the group. These guys do indeed have an alpha male, a male that decides effectively when the group moves from feeding spot to feeding spot. And this male disappeared. And it was a female, you know, a female, biologically identified female, I suppose you'd say, assigned female at birth, who came up and took that alpha male's position and began to fall. She fell directly into the roles that were traditionally assigned to this alpha male, quote unquote. This included moving the troop around, fighting with other adjacent males, et cetera, et cetera. And so that when we were talking about this, I was like, that's really interesting. It's fluid in the sense that you can have easily definable males and easily definable females and everything in between. But you can also see the movement from something that's quote unquote easily definable as female to male, and I would imagine as well vice versa. So we're seeing what is maybe a very basal version of what happens in our own species, which is to say that again we're looking at something that's inherently natural.
I remember when we were
was
talking about this, we
wondering
thought
too.
that this was going to be one of those things that's going to end up on the cutting room floor. We
Yeah.
left out a lot of material, and so it's fantastic that you're calling and asking about this, because this is something that we thought, you know what, we only have so much of a show, but thank you very much for coming up with this topic. I cut you off though. What else did you want to ask about?
Yeah, I mean, like, obviously, primates don't have clinics where primates can opt, or sorry, not primates, like these little monkeys don't have clinics they run
Yeah.
where people can be like, can I take cross-sex hormones? But obviously, you see different. I mean, this is more of like fish and like marine life, but there's obviously the clownfish, which can change sex depending on what's needed to reproduce. Do they see any like sexual dimorphism like that in any primate species where they just like switch sexes?
Well, that's really interesting. We don't tend to see it, at least as far as I know, as far as a general morphology changing from something that is typically dimorphic. But the reason that we don't see that is usually the dimorphism in most primates tends to occur when they're still developing and kind of figuring out their
Right.
role, I suppose you would say, which makes it difficult for them to. They don't tend to have that biological equipment that certain types of clownfish, certain types of wrasse and things like that can do. But that being said, I wouldn't imagine something that's kind of analogous. I guess you would. I don't know. I'm going to throw this out there, and you can maybe tell me what you think. There are certain kinds of morphologic change that occur within these kind of assigned binaries that we give primates. And again, I want to emphasize that the roles that we kind of give them are broad generalizations. We give them the roles based off of the identifying characteristics that we can see, so we can better track them and things like that in observations. To kind of assign a motivation to that would be outside of my understanding for sure. But in like orangutans and certain kinds of mandrills, there are two types of morphology for males, right? So we have flanged males in orangutans. They're the ones with those big, cool dish-like faces. And then there are unflanged males that don't have that. And males that have these flanges can transition to an unflanged male, which looks very much like a female and is often misinterpreted as a female by other males throughout their lifetime. They can go to flanged and back to unflanged. And so it does speak to kind of a flexible morphology within our, not just our order, but our family with other hominids being capable of kind of moving within our meaning humans assigning the binary to them. So who is to say that flexibility were the kind of as you mentioned, they don't have access to like clinics or anything like that, but who's to say that morphology isn't as flexible sort of mentally and emotionally speaking as it is physically?
Sure, I never thought of it that way. I mean, obviously I'm not well educated on you on this topic, but like it's fascinating to think that like, I mean, this is maybe a sci-fi novel, but do you ever think that it would be like a kind of like a Planet of the Apes, where even if we had these like orangutan chimpanzee societies, maybe they would have something akin to like hormone therapy or something like that? I don't know. That's a little like more offbeat, but I don't know.
It's honestly not. I really don't think it is. I think you're dead on. There is absolute, considering we share 98.8% of our DNA with these guys. To me, and this is speculating, of course, because I can't speak to that. It hasn't happened, but I see absolutely no reason as to why their systems wouldn't be equally as complex as our own, and that includes their gender roles and everything in between.
Interesting. That is like, so that's an idea for a Planet of the Apes.
That'd be so
cool.
Fiction.
No, I'm kidding.
That'd be so cool.
Well, I appreciate your taking my call. I don't want to keep you guys too long. I know you probably have other callers and other stuff to get on to, so.
No, but thank you for bringing this topic up. Because there's probably like 5 or 6 things we decided we didn't have time for. This was one of them. So I'm glad
we got to touch on it.
Talked about it. Thank you very much, Teren. Have a great night.
Thank you, Teren.
All right, you too. Awesome. Have a good one. Bye.
So, This is so okay. I knew this was going to happen. Where it's like, you know, we're going to get these calls, and this is just a Puck sits back and lets the guest just go on, because you are such a rich resource for all this, and along with gender roles, we're going to talk about some other things that we can learn from primates. But first, I've been waiting to do this. Let's go ahead and ever since I found out this happened, I've wanted to do this. We have a fun little commercial for you about the other programming we have on the ACA. So if you didn't watch us last week, here's what you missed.
You're like a sex archaeologist.
I'm turning into a historian.
You're like the Indiana Jones of the sex worker industry.
I think some people have a sustainable amount of Dan, and I'm a limited resource.
I need more Dan in my life.
The tenets are a little vaguer than the commandments. Doesn't mention my neighbor's ass in the tenets, which is always on my mind.
I know. I'm reading the Atheist's Handbook to the Old Testament right now. I'm not listening to the audiobook that Seth did because I don't need to be like aroused while listening to this book. You know? Yeah.
I'm probably not going to tell you off, Matt. I do want to give you some critical feedback.
You can, and I don't mind.
Fine.
I did it. It was fun.
Folks, you're missing out on a lot if you don't check out our other content. And my goal is one of these one day. I will be on one of those clips. Today's show is going to be fantastic. Today's show is going to be more like, how do we narrow this down to like the 4 funniest seconds of Erika being on camera?
Well, geez, you've got plenty of monologue to pick from. You got it. I'm telling you, I'm reining myself in, but I don't know that it's enough. My desire to just inform everybody about every fun fact about primates that I have is just too strong.
Okay.
You're seeing only a fraction of my power.
And later, can't keep a straight face. Later, we'll drop some links to show where you can see even more of you, especially. And I gotta plug that debate, if you want to call it that, with Kent Hovind.
Oh gosh, yeah, Dr. Dino. He just got arrested again recently. I don't know if anybody saw that, but yeah.
Stay tuned for a
big dino.
Yeah, I'm sure the nonprofits are going to be all over that one shortly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Amazing.
Okay. So
amazing.
Give me the giggles. I've never had the giggles on the show before that I'm a host. This is very poor form on my part. Okay. So going along with the gender roles that we learned about, that the caller was asking about, 2 other specific behaviors that I want to talk about are homosexual behavior and polygamous behavior. So now both of these are things that we get it from the theists all the time about saying how unnatural this is and how sinful it is, and we'll get that mostly about homosexuality than polygamy, because there are some religious organizations that embrace polygamy to some extent. But talking about these two, homosexuality and polygamous behavior, what can we learn about from our primates friends about the nature of homosexuality and polygamy?
Yeah, I mean, the key thing to remember is that both of these are, I wouldn't even just say widespread, they're common. So it depends on which species we're looking at, because we see every single kind of mating system that you can imagine within primates. So you've got your polygamy, as in one male multi-female, or one female multi-male. Ladies were represented well as within the primate order. And this would be like your gorilla, who has a harem of females that he maintains, or your female marmoset, who maintains a small group of males that take care of her every need because they don't know who the dad is. And that's what you would call paternity confusion, which is beneficial for the female and kind of creates this interesting sexual arms race. You could look at either of those as far as your polygamy goes. Of course, we see pair bonding as well within primates, your gibbons, your siamangs, but they are what you call social monogamists, which I didn't actually mention this to you earlier, Puck, but this is kind of interesting because they are monogamous until the opportunity strikes to not be monogamous. So they are like your amazing, perfect neighbor who you find out, the husband or the wife or whoever is actually, sleeping with the pastor, maybe, who knows. And maybe bolstering either her young or spreading their genetics in a bit wider net. You do have your very rare true monogamist in the primate order, and it's not humans. It's actually tamarins. And they do this adorable thing called tail twinning. So you'll see them huddled together, and their tails are intertwined as it goes down the way. But if we're trying to figure out more about human sexuality, we do have to look to our closest living relatives, which are, of course, going to be your chimpanzees and your bonobos.
Oh, I knew it was going to come up.
It's always going to come up. You can't have a conversation about primate sexuality and leave the bonobos out. Paniscus, these guys are total freaks when it comes to like what they're getting up to, just like us. So your chimps, they tend to, they're polygamous. So one male with multiple females and one female with multiple males. It is a total free-for-all with these guys. And with bonobos, even more so. Bonobos they exhibit every kind of sexuality. They do females with females, males with males, males with females. They do masturbation. They do fellatio and cunnilingus. They do face-to-face missionary sex, or they do other positions. I mean, if you can think it up, bonobos do it, and they do some things that aren't typical, or I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't. I guess I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong on this, but they do engage in something called penis fencing, which is exactly what it sounds like. And I've never met anyone who's engaged in that, so maybe they're a bit more creative than we are. But the thing about bonobos is like, okay, well, why are they doing this? Why do they do this and chimps don't? Right? Why is it that bonobos are so hypersexual? And the reason is because these guys use sex to mediate any kind of conflict. They can be incredibly aggressive, just like chimps can, but unlike chimps, they do a quickie before they get into it. They're like, okay, well, we'll be violent and maybe a little, get at each other, but first, let's bang one out. And the classic example that's presented for this is two captive bonobos were observed hanging out together in their enclosure, and they threw a cardboard box in there. It's a type of enrichment. What are the bonobos going to do with the cardboard box? And they looked at each other and they're hyping each other up, and they're like, oh my God, this cardboard box, this is incredible. And then they start having sex. It's like, okay, they got to bang one out before they investigate the box. But the reason that this is so interesting is because the investigation of homosexuality it tends to be, very interestingly enough, very focused on homosexual males. But bonobos, while males certainly engage in their own kind of work, like the primary type of sexuality in general that we see in bonobos is females with other females. And this is potentially the hypotheses behind it is because, well, bonobos are a very matriarchal society. The society is led by a coalition of older females, and they encourage their bonding by getting it on with each other pretty much all the time. It's a way to strengthen these social groups and maintain, because interestingly enough, bonobos, a single male bonobo is still going to be, they're a little bit sexually dimorphic, much like we are. So the odds that a single male bonobo is going to be able to, in a dyadic or 1v1 interaction, outcompete a female, if there's like a really nice feeding spot, is pretty high. But if you've got a female with a bunch of siblings and also lovers, they can just kind of oust the male. And that's what they do. And I can actually, I was telling Puck about this. This is a very fortuitous conversation because one of my colleagues just came back from the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where she was studying bonobos. And I was like, I gotta know, are they as gay as we've been told? And she was like, oh, gayer. And I was like, that checks out. that checks out. It really does. And she was like, these guys, for everything, it's just they hash it out with sex every single time. And it's funny because one group will start getting it on and everybody else will be like, I too would like to reduce the social tensions, and then it's just a bonobo orgy in the forest, and then everybody's chill and they all eat with one another, and it's relaxed and they're good to go.
I have to take a moment to shill for calls here, because if you have any questions for a completely sharp and very entertaining science educator. This is the time to do it. Okay, Erika is incredibly fun. You saw knows the subject material incredibly well, and we're just gonna have so much fun with it. So if you have any questions at all for Erika, it doesn't even have to be about primates or anything. Just give us a call and we'll do our best for you. One of the things that I did want to talk about though, while we're talking about this, is I believe you mentioned a little bit about the different kinds of social structures that we'd find in primates. You mentioned that there's sometimes it's one male, multiple females, or as you were talking about, females who bond together in a group. And you do find these; they're clearly everywhere. But I suppose the question is twofold. First of all, tell us more about the kinds of different groups that we have, and then I guess the next question is, why don't we hear about these very often? And we mostly hear about just like we'll think of a male alpha silverback with a female harem, but we don't hear about all these other different types of social structures in primates.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it used to be kind of a taboo subject. I mean, you can picture a bunch of kind of like iron tight white shirt dudes sitting around in like the 50s trying to decide whether or not they're going to publish their paper on how much male mounting they were seeing in chacma baboons. And it's like, I wonder how the academic community would have kind of appreciated that at the time. And we know the 50s probably not well. But yeah, it's a really good question, because it's not just the silverbacks that are presented as like this, uber macho, like one male, multiple females, and he leads with his harem, and it's hyper macho and really cool. It's like, honey, I gotta tell you, the silverbacks are getting up to it too. Even though they've got this polygamous, or polygynous, I should say, relationship, there is one male and multiple females, and what that does do is it leaves a bunch of males wandering around without a harem to call his own. And you end up with these bachelor troops of males with a lot of time on their hands. And we see homosexual behavior in these male gorillas as well. But yeah, I mean, if you can dream it up, we probably see it in primates. We see, like I said, all kinds of polygamy. Those were considered your social mating systems, social systems and social mating systems. And we see general polygamy with multiple males and multiple females. We see polyandry with one female, multiple males. We see polygyny, like I said, with the gorillas, and we do see pair bonding too. So, and interestingly enough, we also see like consortships going on in orangutans. They live in solitary arrangements with multiple females with territories, and the females don't tend to overlap because they'll compete with one another. And then the male kind of traipses through the territories as he pleases. And sometimes when males encounter other males or females encounter other females, things get steamy there as well. I mean, the thing is primates are inherently very cognitive. We're part of what defines the primate order is a large brain to body size ratio, even more than what we see in other mammals. And I guess big brains go hand in hand with being highly sexual, because that's what we see with a lot of these primates: high social flexibility, and because via the sociosexual hypothesis, if we want to take that route, a lot of sex can lead to high levels of bonding and social cohesion. Well, it makes sense. The bigger the brain, the larger groups that you can kind of live in and relationships that you can manage, and the more helpful a tool sex is going to be for mediating conflicts. So it's not really that surprising. This is mirrored, by the way, in other cognitive animals. We see it in proboscideans, so your elephants. These guys can get it on across pretty much all lines that we see, because males and females occasionally will meet during breeding seasons, but outside of that, a lot of the intercourse can get pretty gay. Dolphins, of course, everybody knows dolphins are total freaks. That's bottlenoses especially, but they engage in this as well. And what do primates and proboscideans and cetaceans like dolphins share? It's huge encephalizations. Like we just all have these big honking brains, and that's that's all she wrote. So I think that it would be fair to say that there is this inherent relationship between the three factors of cognition, sociality, and sexuality. I think we can make that claim safely.
No, I just, encephalization is just one of those words you don't think you're going to hear when you wake up in the morning. So this is why I love doing these episodes. It's like, I love bringing people on who are deeply passionate and knowledgeable about their subject. And I just sit back and I just fire questions away. Like, here's an obvious one, a really quick one. With groups that practice, like you said, polygyny and polyandry, is it because of a non-50-50 distribution of sexes at birth?
No, actually, in the case, although it could have been potentially at first that kind of triggered this type of social system, what we see right now is in cases where this is like a huge concept in primatology. It's like, which sex is the dispersing sex? Who's leaving? Because to prevent things like incest, you got to have one sex bail out of the social group once they reach maturity. Some groups, because they're solitary, like in orangutans, everyone leaves, right? Gibbons are very similar in this. Once you get a mature individual, and gibbons are interesting because they are, again, socially monogamous, so they're pair bonded unless an opportunity presents itself. And males and females are effectively identical to one another. They're less sexually dimorphic than we are. Just, you couldn't tell the difference unless you could get a look at their genitals, which they're very furry and cute, so it's hard to. But yeah, the way that these social systems come into play is a very interesting question. The topic of my master's thesis was how something that's kind of related, which is the sexual dimorphism of the canine teeth, what kind of pressures lead to either a reduction in the differences between what we would consider when we're looking at a binary of males and females, or an increase in the difference between the males and females. And it all boils down to the size of the group that they're living in. So kind of what you were just getting at. That can influence too the types of mating systems that we see, as well as the habitat can influence it, and most importantly, which sex is the one that is forming the coalitions or leaving the group. So in the case of gorillas, females leave the group when they reach maturity. So you reach this, you kind of have this system that lends itself to the formation of these new harems and of these new bachelor groups. Because if you're a male who can never command a harem of other females, you're going to end up hanging out with the boys, Saturdays being for the boys for the rest of your life. And this happens. It really does. So it's no wonder that in these social animals with big brains, in certain cases, we see animals that are, in some cases, taking what they can get, but in others, females will just be in estrus, which means that they're receptive to mating, and males will just pick males, or females will just pick females. We see female mating or female mounting behavior with other females, males doing, like I said, with bonobos penis fencing, or doing like full penetration, if you will, with one another. So even within the confines of there's plenty of folks to go around, we can see preferences emerge. And this doesn't just go for primates. Like, we see this in other animals too. I believe the number is 18% of male rams, they exhibit a preference for a male ram partner. And this is something that's likely mirrored in females as well. So it's just, in some cases, like I said, it can be a take what you can get. And in others, this is firmly established preference, which is really cool. And it's kind of what we see in humans too. Even in societies where it's like, and because of course these can go the opposite way, that are very restrictive towards non-heteronormative sexualities, humans are very flexible. So that's an interesting deal.
All right, now we have time for another call. So go ahead and if you have a question for Erika, this is the time to do it. Give us a call right now. But before we do that, this is, of all the things that we talked about getting ready for this show, the absolute funniest to me, but also the most sensible, because it made sense as soon as you started talking about it. The most sensible thing I heard when we were talking about show content: what can you learn about a species, and then therefore also about humans, by looking at their relative testicle size? It sounds like a ridiculous question, but there really is a good answer for this.
Yeah. Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's a really good one. There have been quite a few studies done on this, because when the study kind of first came out, it was several decades ago, and everybody was kind of like, no, we really need to double check this. So there's something that's very important to understand within the context of evolutionary biology and ecology in general, which is that there are different types of competition, both for food and for mates. And in the case of testes size, we're looking at overt competition, which is like, let's duke it out with our fists or our teeth, versus sperm competition, which is, it's a free-for-all orgy style situation, and we're going to let the sperm do the duking it out. We're going to let them hash it out. And of course, that lends itself to differences in testicle size because that contributes to differences in emissions. And the more sperm you have, the more likely you're going to inseminate another individual who you're trying to inseminate. And so what that leads to is a very basic hypothesis. If you're polygamous, you're going to have big balls. That's the very long and short of it. And so some scientists basically sat around, and I wonder, how well this went over with the primates they were measuring, but they were like, let's measure testicular volume and we'll see if it can predict mating system, right? And that's what they did. And testicular volume predicts mating system so well. And I'll show you what I mean. Chimpanzees, I mean, they're working with grapefruits back there. It's intense. If you've ever seen a male chimpanzee just sitting out, you're kind of like, whoa, that's a lot. That's a lot to be packing. And that's because, again, these guys are polygamous across the board. It's a free for all constantly. Whenever anybody's in season or in estrus, I would say, or they just kind of feel like it, mating is going to happen. And because they mate with one male, multiple females, one female, multiple males, there's a lot of sperm competition going on. So these guys really have to be packing some serious artillery back there. Compare that to a gorilla. They're polygynous. So, and they do overt competition. So it's two males that duke it out physically. And what that leads to is like lemon head sized testicles. And like they're working with this as far as the phallus or the penis goes. So if someone ever looks at you and they're like, yeah, dude, like you're hung like a gorilla, that's not a compliment. It's really not. And so then the obvious question is, okay, well, where do humans fit in? What is it with people? Are we more like the polygamous chimps? Are we like the gorillas? And then the last member of the list would be something like gibbons, who fall somewhere in between the polygynous, where it's like one trying to isolate several females to himself versus a free-for-all. And the answer is humans fall somewhere in between being monogamous or pair bonded and being polygamous, like the chimpanzees. Which really says a lot. We're kind of a species in transition when it comes to that. Transition towards what? I don't know. But this is mirrored in our societies, because even in societies that allow quote unquote polygamy, it only occurs in a small portion of the population, but that portion is pretty consistent across societies. It's something like 8 to 10%, if memory serves. And that's because some people are really and truly wired towards monogamy and some aren't. They just have that predisposition to either be able to manage multiple partners, or they're the jealous type who aren't into it. And the important thing, of course, is you got to find someone who gels in the same way that you do. And that's kind of all that matters. But there is a genetic basis for this, both for the morphology of male and female and everybody in between's kind of their physical traits, their genitals, etc., and the genes that go into what they prefer.
No, and this is a good segue as we go into the last section, because we've been talking a lot about primate behavior and primate sexuality, and that's all well and interesting. But the reason I wanted to talk about this topic was, what can we learn about human behavior,
right,
from primate sexuality? So with all that we have talked about regarding primate behavior, what can that show us about human sexual behavior?
Yeah, and that therein lies the ultimate question, right? Because what is it about humans that is different? That's constantly the question we're asking in primatology, which is funny because the more we ask it, the more we find out, well, not much. There's not a whole lot that separates humans from the other apes or even the other primates or the other animals. I've said this on a lot of shows, but I think it's a really good point to make. Robert Sapolsky, who's a famous primatologist, worked with baboons. He separated human behavior into 3 categories. The things that we do that's just like all the other animals, and that's the biggest circle. And then there's the things that we do that are like all other animals, but they're a little bit different. We kind of tweak them, right? And then there's the smallest circle of all, which is the things that humans do that are entirely unique. And in the case of sexuality, what we're really looking at is that second category. We're looking at taking what other organisms do, what other primates do, and we tweak it a little bit. So it's like, do humans exhibit all the different styles of mating and sort of pair bonding, etc.? Yes, we do. We exhibit all of their preferences, and we exhibit all of their different types of organizations, because we're an incredibly variable and numerous species. And then, of course, it's like, okay, well, what is it that we do different? And I believe that's kind of like what we've had intended on getting into a little bit, which is that humans are one of the only primates that consistently sees pair bonding in homosexual couples as well as heterosexual couples. And this, I think, is just due to like the reason we don't see it in other primates is just because the conditions weren't amenable to it. They're in these pair bonded species, we usually see like these territories that are very distantly spread out, so it's kind of just less conducive to a homosexual pairing. But in humans, there's actually quite a decent fitness benefit to homosexuality and to homosexual pair bonds. And it's kind of what we were alluding to a little bit earlier, which is that you've got an extra 2 sets of hands to help care for the young in the larger group, because humans are evolved effectively to live in groups of like 50 to 75 people. It really does take a village. It's like the atomized society that we live in with nuclear families. Like, it's fine if that's your preference, but it makes it a lot harder on the parents, because human children weren't meant, quote unquote, to be raised to be essentially isolated to only 2 people, because raising a kid is a lot of hard work. And that's where kind of homosexual pairings come in and become very useful to both the individuals and to the group, because this is 2 individuals who are raring and ready to help raise all of the kids or do the hunting or do the gathering. And as I mentioned earlier to Puck, this is interesting because it pans out in the reproductive fitness of their relatives. Because the question is, of course, okay, if they're not investing in their own kids, how are they passing on their genetics? Shouldn't homosexuality have died out long ago? And the answer is obviously a resounding no. We see homosexuality in pretty much every culture. I can't think of one that we don't. And one of the potential reasons is because individuals who have homosexual siblings see a higher fitness. That is to say, on average, they reproduce more than individuals who don't have a homosexual sibling. So people who are gay, they basically put their reproductive benefits into their siblings and pass on their genes that way, because you share 25% odd with your siblings. So we see the proliferation of this, and what we also see is the benefit for the entire group. Everyone's happy. So even if you're not doing that classic reproductive sex, you're still seeing the passing on of your genetics and an increase in the well-being of the group.
So one of the biggest differences that, like, off the top of my head that I can think of between human sexuality and animal sexuality is the question of consent. So
Yeah.
I'm just curious, in what ways do we see consent mirrored in primate sexuality, if at all?
Oh no. Yeah, this is a really fun question, because people tend to paint, and you usually see it in like kind of, for lack of a better term, like incel groups, that it's like, hey, you're lucky that you don't live in caveman times, or like, everybody's gonna lose their consent and it's gonna be, rape and murder and chaos across the board. It's like, oh no. If you think that, you've never seen primates interact with one another. Because whether there's a lot of sexual dimorphism or none at all, females, who are usually, they tend to be the more overtly the victims of harassment and attempted coercion by males, they just don't suffer it. And in bonobos, this is especially the case, but we also see it in things like Japanese macaques, other macaque species, baboons, groups of females who build up these coalitionary matriline, or they have matrilines that build up these coalitions. They'll just beat the shit out of whoever's trying to coerce their sibling or their friend. And interestingly enough, in some species, they build friendships too. So in baboons, while they do have their matrilines, females build friendships with males that aren't necessarily sexual in nature. They may never reproduce. They just build friendships. That's what they call them in the papers, friendships. Usually it's to help a male who's immigrating in. He befriends a female who already lives in the group, and they just kind of stay pals. And sometimes if a male is harassing, this is classic in like chocolate or olive baboons, if a male's harassing a female, she like starts barking, calling out, and her buddy comes around and just beats the crap out of the would-be attacker, right? And interestingly enough, we see the rare reversal of who's trying to coerce who, again, classically in bonobos. Because in bonobos, we see the reversal where females attempt to coerce unwilling males. This has been reported on, and we tend to not use more humanized, more anthropomorphized terms like rape, I guess you would say, in when we're referring to other primates. But that's what they're attempting. So males tend to call out for, interestingly enough, their mothers. Their mothers come and mediate conflicts and say, hey, back off, don't mess with my son. I don't want you, he's not willing, so back off. But yeah, coercion is common. Attempted coercion is common. Successful rape, if you will, lack of consent, is not in primates, generally speaking, because it's just not worth it for the would-be attacker to risk being mobbed by an entire group of very upset females or males, females or males or females and males, with that are friends and have formed alliances with the would-be victim. And no more is this evident. This is like a last anecdote because it's kind of recent and really interesting, is in mandrills. So mandrills are they're the most sexually dimorphic primates. Everyone loves mandrills. They're really cool. Rafiki is like the classic. Everybody knows who Rafiki is. He's a mandrill. And males are like 4 to 5 times the size of females. They're enormous. And they live in solitary, their own solitary world during the non-breeding season. And females live in these massive groups of like 600 to 800 individuals. And the females are just big chillin'. The breeding season comes around and the males come in, and sometimes they compete with one another. And essentially they're trying to woo and inseminate as many females as possible. And the females are like, okay, well, we want to find, males that we think are going to be cool and that we want to use to pass on our own genetics. Well, there was a report by Sexual et al. A few years ago, I believe it was, and a male came in and was trying to coerce and solicit females, and they really weren't into it. And despite being 1/5 the size of the male, dozens and dozens mobbed and killed the male, which is the first observation of that, a lethal coalitionary attack of female mandrills on the much larger male mandrill. So it doesn't matter how sexually dimorphic you are, coercion's never going to be the desired strategy within our own order. And that's because of the alliances, friendships, and bonds that we form, sometimes through sex. That's consent proved.
No, so trying to put a big, nice, beautiful bow on this, it honestly sounds like I can't think of very many things that you find in human sexuality as developed as we think we are, and as far along on in the evolutionary chain as we are. I can't think of anything anymore that you find in humans that you're not going to find in any other primate species. And maybe I'm speaking a little bit out of turn here. Maybe you can help me out on this. It sounds like this might be a really good piece of evidence on the to support evolution. What am I missing?
No, I mean you're entirely correct. While you were saying that, I was mulling around in my own brain. What do we see? I mean, maybe like contraceptives, but that's only because what is contraceptive except a very specific tool? And that's what we do. We come up with these specific tools to meet specific needs. It used to be missionary style sex, actually. That's interesting. In the world of paleoanthropology, for a while people were like, that's what triggered common monogamy in humans, is that we started having face-to-face sexual intercourse. But nope, bonobos do that too. So it's always the bonobos. They're always at it.
So it makes me wonder, as much as we've studied, clearly there must still be more to go. So what's at the horizon here? What are we starting to just learn about when it comes to primate sexuality that we can turn around and say there's an analog for this in humans? What's the next thing we're studying?
Yeah, I think as far as what I've seen, it's looking at it in specific contexts, right? Like, do we see a change in preference given the environment? I know there's been some really cool work done on rhesus macaques at the Cayo Santiago field site, which is in Puerto Rico, on like, do we see increased homosexuality or heterosexuality after hurricanes? And that seems like a really weird specific question. Like, why are we asking this question? And it's because when Hurricane Maria hit, it like wiped out a ton of the foliage, the trees that are on this island, and it really changed the way that the macaques were behaving. And so we've got this opportunity to see, okay, given a lot of evolution tends to occur after these large natural disasters in nature, well, if it's their behavior that's changing to accommodate a new environment, is it all aspects of their behavior? And I don't know the answer to that question. That's kind of what they're looking at. It's like human preferences certainly change and evolve through individual lifetimes, and through different circumstances. Is the same true for other primates? So we'll see.
So one thing I want to do too is I want to kind of change the way that our viewers are going to interact going forward. And specifically this time, a large number of us, including me, live very close to zoos, where there are, like the Cincinnati Zoo has a wonderful primate exhibit, right? So the next time we go watch primates at the zoo, what's something that we can start looking for that we never would have thought of?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah, you can start to try to figure out who's vying for kind of new social status as you watch these guys move around. So one of the biggest things that primates do to increase bonding, like to create new bonds outside of sex, of course, is grooming. So that the classic thing where you see primates like picking through each other's fur, like that's just super typical for creating new bonds and reestablishing current bonds. And whoever's getting groomed is usually going to be dominant to the one who's grooming in their social hierarchy, and that's because it's like, okay, it's like ass kissing, right? Like it's sucking up. And it's funny because when I was in my master's program, what they said is like should look pretty similar to like little girl braiding trains, like you see like little girls when they're in elementary school, they do these braiding trains where they're braiding each other's hair. It's because someone touching your hair just kind of feels nice. And my favorite too to look for, and this is pretty ubiquitous across all of the order, is signs of anxiety is like self-scratching. So if you see primates, kind of scratching themselves on their forearms or on the backs of their heads, it's usually because they're kind of stressed out. And if that's happening, it's probably because something social is awry. So if you see self-scratching going on, you should start kind of like looking around and seeing, okay, like who's eyeing our poor victim here? Like, what have they recently been a victim of? Have they been chased away from their favorite food? Have they been bullied or whatever? And the self-scratch is kind of funny because it's like I myself, as many people are in our modern world, I suffer from anxiety. And so sometimes when I'm nervous, I kind of find myself scratching my arm and I'm like, oh my God. So like them.
Okay, so knowing that like you have a big strength in dealing with apologetics directly, just to go back to that just for a brief little while, what would you say like is their it's hard to say their most meaningful objection, but every now and then they do hit on something that's not really explained yet and we don't have a satisfactory answer for. Like they'll talk about the problem of consciousness, which yeah, to be fair, we haven't really solved it. What is the best meaningful objection you've gotten from a creationist about something we don't yet understand about primate behavior and we're still working on, if there's anything?
Yeah, for things like primate behavior, some of the biggest questions have to do with the fossil record, right? Because it's like every human behavior you can pretty much find an analog for in chimps. But one of the big ones, like I was saying with Robert Sapolsky's circles, that smallest circle, the example of that smallest circle is humans empathize, but we empathize and are capable of empathizing through time and even through reality, right? Like we can empathize with things that don't exist. You can see a picture of a sad dog and feel sad for that dog, even though that dog isn't real, right? Like someone has drawn a doodle of a sad cartoon dog. You're like, oh, that's really sad. That kind of hurts my feelings. It's humans are the only animals that do that. That's a very unique human trait. And it's likely that this ability to empathize through space and time is key to our sociality, which is humanity's greatest strength, our ability to cooperate with one another. Because we're not very strong. We're pretty good at running for long distances, which means we can acquire meat just by running things to death. We're actually one of the best long distance runners in the animal kingdom, which people always depict humans in like fiction and stuff as like the most worthless animal alive. It's like, our brains are our only good trait. It's like, no, we're really good at running, which is awesome because I hate running. It's my least favorite thing to do. I do it all the time, and it isn't. I think the runner sign's a myth. But to briefly answer that question, it's like, yeah, that's one of the biggest questions. What happened in human evolution approximately 2 million years ago that led to this drastic increase in the brain case size of our lineage? Because you go from Australopithecines, which have like 500 cc's of a brain volume. It's decent sized. It's not huge. Chimps are at like 350. So you're looking at a difference of like 150 cc's. Humans, we're boasting like 1200, which is more than double what we see in the Australopithecines. So something really important happened approximately 2 million years ago that changed the selection that our lineage was going through. And that might have to do with the problem of consciousness as well, because it's like, I think I can say beyond a shadow of a doubt that there is a level of consciousness in most primates. But consciousness is a gradient. It's not you have it or you don't. There are varying levels across the animal kingdom, and there are varying levels in primates as well. As far as like dealing with creationists, their recent fave has been abiogenesis, or as we in the dunking on young earth creationist community like to call it, origins or bust, which it's like, we haven't solved the origin of life, therefore the earth was made 6,000 years ago and God is real, and it's specifically my interpretation of the Christian God. It's like, wow, that's like 6 leaps in a row. Like, it's just incredible. But of course, not having the origin of life problem solved doesn't mean that evolution doesn't exist or the earth is young. Those are 3 separate issues. And we're still obviously working on the origin of life and solving it. With regard to the origin of consciousness, and again, I'm trying to watch my monologuing, but it's like, as a
No,
cryptid
please,
side,
this is great.
this is really, really cool. And it was just done. So I think that it's like in the past 2 years. I think it's really, really interesting. So there's a gene that all primates have called RGAP11A. Now, this gene is responsible for the assigning stem cells to be neurons. So it basically says, hey, you're going to be a neuron, you're going to be a neuron, you're going to be a neuron. And this RGAP11A gene is very specific to primates, very important to primates, and it may contribute to why primates have bigger brain to body size ratios amongst the mammals. But humans have a partial duplication of this gene called RGAP11B, because scientists are, of course, very creative. And so scientists were sitting around and they were like, okay, so we've got RGAP11B, no other living primate does. What if we give one of them RGAP11B? What would happen if we did that? And so they decided that they were going to insert RGAP11B into a marmoset brain, a marmoset in utero. And what we saw is a 3-fold increase in the brain size of the marmoset. Now, they aborted the fetus prior to it actually reaching development and being born, which, I mean, like, that's like a Planet of the Monkeys situation averted, I guess. But it would have been really cool to see, okay, does it transfer to like cognition? But that's neat, because with chimps at approximately 300 to 350 cc's brain case and humans being at around 1200, that's about a 3-fold increase. So is it possible that this single, very simple partial duplication event is responsible for the triggering of the human brain size as it is today through time? Would that solve the problem of consciousness? I don't know. It would definitely at least partially solve the issue of, why are our brains so big? It's because of one partial duplication. It's actually crazy that it can boil down to that one single event. And of course, it'd be a massive fitness benefit. I mean, you've got like this, Pinky in the Brain situation going on in the savannah, but I don't know. It's yet to be seen what role this played in our actual evolution, actually attempting to trace that lineage. So, but it sure is cool.
Okay, so this is obviously a gigantic topic. We're leaving a lot on the cutting room floor. There's a lot that we talked about in prep that didn't even make it here.
I know.
So the first question then is, like, what did we not get to talk about that if we had more time you'd want to talk more about?
Well, my biggest question is what your favorite primate is, honestly. And you can't say people. Yeah.
I guess I haven't put enough thought into it.
There's so many to pick from. There's so many.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's fascinating. And you're putting me on the spot here.
I know.
I don't even know what most of them are called, but the ones with super long arms and incredible climbing ability. Howler monkey? I don't know.
Oh, you might be. You're talking about spider monkeys, which are very long boys, or you're potentially talking about gibbons, which of course are my favorite primate.
No, it's fascinating just watching them navigate.
Yeah,
and I have, excuse me, I have to wonder, is this learned? Do they watch others do this and like, okay, I can figure out how to support my own body weight just with my arms and figure out how do I get through this gigantic maze of vines that the keepers have set up for us. It's just fascinating watching them move.
Yeah, no, you're so right. Mesmerizing.
Okay, so let's go with spider monkeys. I don't know the difference between what they and gibbons look like, but just watching primates move is fascinating to me.
I've got to give a recommendation to you and to everybody else too. You gotta, if you get a chance and you're just like feeling, down, or you want like a nice little uplifting thing to watch on YouTube, you gotta look up clips of Orangutan Jungle School, because it's the most incredibly, like, just puts a smile instantly on your face thing I've ever seen. It's a bunch of baby orangutans who sadly, of course, have been orphaned, are being taught by humans and other kind of resident orangutans how to be orangutans. So they're like trying to figure it out, and they're so awkward and adorable in this journey, because the hope is that you're going to release them back into the wild. Anyways, Orangutan Jungle School, it's adorable. You'll thank me later. You'll watch it all night.
Okay, well let's start talking about where else the audience can go if they want to know more about this topic. So we're going to give you a bunch of links in the comments, but just off the top of your head, Erika, where would you direct people to start learning about primate sexuality and human sexuality?
Yeah, a really great resource is going to be Origin Stories. It's a podcast that's been put out by the Leakey Foundation, and they cover pretty much every topic in primates, primate evolution and human evolution, including sexuality, and different kinds of mating systems, things of that nature. That's one of my favorites to kind of look at and watch. Carta online on YouTube is also really great. CARTA. It's put on by a couple of different universities, and they have really cool paleoanthropologist and primatology speakers come on and talk about, again, a lot of every topic under the sun with relation to humanity, what makes us human and what makes other primates. Both of those are really good and great to get started if you're kind of looking for specific aspects like sexuality with regard to humans, human evolution, and other animals, other primates.
Okay, and then the most important, where can people go to learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, obviously. Well, I put out bangers all the time on Twitter, obviously. That's going to be at Gutsick Gibbon. I have a Patreon. It's just Gutsick Gibbon. You can, be a patron of mine. And all that does is it mostly just gets you early access to videos, shout outs, things like that. And you do, if you are my highest tier patron, I will draw you a cool avatar. It's very adorable, I promise. And you can, of course, find me on YouTube. It's just Gutsick Gibbon. That's the old handle. Just Gutsick Gibbon. You should see a little blue primate.
I kind of want to be commemorated in primate form now. That should be like one of the you've made it as an atheist YouTuber when Erika has commemorated you in primate form, and then Polygamy has turned you into a cartoon, right?
Oh, the Polygamy milestone is real. I loved my Polygamy avatar. It truly was a moment to remember for me. But yeah, you'd be surprised how many people are like, yeah, I want you to draw me as a primate, and I'm like, which one?
Right.
Like, well, you pick, and it's like, okay.
It's like, okay, which primates have the purple mohawk? Which one would that be good for? I don't know that this works for a mandrill face, but
wouldn't that be sweet though? Like, I mean, mandrills are going to be great for all that color. They've got some purples in there, and also, if you want a cool, fun thing to look up on Google Images, Guinan faces. There are a bunch of different types of monkeys that fall into the Guinan. They're little leaf-eating monkeys in Africa. There's a ton of them. And they have some of the wildest looking faces. Some of them have beautiful coloring. Some of them have incredible patterns. Some of them have amazing facial hair. So it's like, these guys are really representing like the potential fashion and tastes that we see across the primate order.
All right. Well, we're gonna wrap this up here, but don't go too far because we're gonna be going to Discord shortly. But before we do that, I wanted to talk about some of the other ways that you can get a hold of us and watch some other ACA content. The first way is to go to a one-stop shop for ACA content in podcast form. If you go to tiny.cc/AEN podcasts. You can watch this and back episodes of Secular Sexuality, The Atheist Experience, and the other shows on the Atheist Experience Network. Go check that out and give us a listen. But remember, this is in podcast form only. Let this episode stand as a testament that you want to be watching these shows live as much as possible. This was so much fun. You can interact with us on our Facebook Secular Sexuality fan group. This is a group made by fans for fans. Go to facebook.com/groups/secular sex FG. That was a tongue twister. I'm glad I got through that.
You nailed it.
Thank you. I'm on there also. There's poll questions and plenty of ways to interact. If you had any questions for anybody, that's a great place to let it out. We're going to be appearing on the Discord next. So you go to tiny.cc/ACA Discord. Eric and I are both going to be there to answer any questions you might not have gotten through today, or anything else that the cast and crew want to throw at us. Get some fantastic merch. And I got to get this. Why don't we have a pillow? If you go to bit.ly. Oh, wow. Goodness, my notes are wrong. Go to tiny.cc/merch ACA. Look at that. I want that little throw pillow. That's like the most awesome throw pillow ever.
When you said pillow, I was thinking body pillows, like the anime body pillows of like the cast. I was like, that's an idea.
Okay.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
If that's not already in the docket, let's see if we can make that happen. And of course, I got to thank the people, because all Erika and I had to do is sit here, look great, and talk. But there's a whole crew of people who are behind the scenes making everything happen. Let's go ahead and say hi to the crew cam. Hello, everybody. Thank you guys so much for all this great stuff. I brought orange soda for everyone, but I will probably drink it all myself.
Oh, rip.
Erika, leave our audience with a final thought.
Oh man, over on my channel, I address my audience as a large group of gentle and, of course, very modern apes, and so I'll leave you guys with the same, and ask you to stay gentle and kind to one another, and of course remain very modern, and also get vaccinated. So, gentle, modern, and vaccinated apes. That's what we want to be.
Oh, and for the first time ever, I actually get to give the secular sexuality closer. So just after we leave here, give us about 5 to 10 minutes to show up on the Discord. And until then, you have a little bit of time. So why not give yourself a big old orgasm? Or better yet, give somebody else one.
There it is.
Have a good night.
Watch Talk Heathen live Sundays at 1 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTH and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callth.